Okay, I think let's kick off now. It's 4 minutes past 10. We've got 29 participants, including Tony and Colm from Tlou. Good morning to everyone. Good evening to any Aussies that might be on. I've already suggested the format should probably be Tony and Colm running through the recent update, the open offer, where we are with the financing, the use of proceeds, and then we can take questions from the floor. And then after that, potentially a chance to drill down on some individual areas of interest. I know you all submitted some questions, so if they're not covered in the call here, in the topics, then this is your opportunity to ask. You can unmute yourself at the appropriate times to, there's an unmute button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and you just click that once. Yeah, we'll structure it in two sections, but you know, if necessary, then I guess we can, you know, pop in to ask questions, but it'd be good to keep them all at once. So no further ado, over to Tony Gilby, I guess.
Well, thank you, Sasha, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As per Sasha's introduction, we thought it would be a good idea to get together and hear from the company directly on a bit of background to the current rights issue or open offer, so-called, and also to give you an opportunity to ask any questions of Colm or myself. So basically an update on recent events, and we'll start from, I guess, early this year. Colm and I spent a lot of time in Botswana prior to the issues of the past few months. So we were over there almost constantly from January through to early March. And when we left in early March, things went a little bit more, became a little bit more difficult to travel, of course. We found that being there and constantly working with those who are making the decisions worked out very well in terms of getting progress, and particularly this year we wanted progress on the PPA. And whilst, as often happens, everything appeared to be fine when we boarded that plane about the end of the first week of March, it did take a week or so for that to come to fruition, but that was a major milestone. And within the lockdown phase, I guess that didn't have as much an impact as we otherwise would have anticipated. Now, there's been some questions and some queries on the PPA. I'll assume those, we'll park them to one side, and happy to answer any of those as we go through this process this morning. So we've been with the PPA secured, and there's a little bit of backwards and forwards on a couple of bit of I dotting and T crossing, which is all progressing in the background during lockdown. We were looking then very seriously at where the money is going to come from, particularly for the poles and wires, to connect to the grid. Once we connect to the grid, it lowers a significant risk hurdle for us and allows funding to become more prevalent and at a much better price for the company. So we've mentioned in mainly our quarterly releases that we've been speaking with Botswana Development Corporation for some time now, for some time, many months, and we've been progressing the concept with them of a funding package to not only connect to the grid, but then rapidly expand to 10 megawatts. And the beauty of doing a deal with BDC, all else being equal, is that it allows us to have further buy-in from the government effectively, and they have very deep pockets. We were running, or we are still running, an open process, though, as we've mentioned in our various releases. We've been in discussions with primarily two other parties. We've gone much further afield, of course, but primarily two other parties. And one of the questions, I believe, that has been floating around is why has the capital raising occurred at this point in time, for example? Well, we wanted to run down all those leads first, and the other two leads also look very attractive with, excuse me, with verbal discussions to actually get to commit to paper made it very challenging, and we just couldn't get them over the line in a reasonable time frame. They're still there, but BDC is the keenest to do a deal with us. So with the BDC deal that we've been talking with them on, part of that deal includes a requirement, and it hasn't gone away, it's been there for some time, requirement for us to pay for their due diligence. Whilst we've been pushing back on that, we've been able to quantify it. So clearly we've had to have some additional funds to do that. It's not too bad. We've been also proceeding with a full engineering study for the poles and wires, which will include actually going out for quotes for those poles and wires. That's another reason why we did some extra funding, and the ongoing field operations were still flowing at the city, for example. So to primarily firm up the balance sheet, to make it stronger, to close the BDC negotiations, plus those other points I made, we moved towards the poles and wires and then expansion, rapid expansion. So that was the idea for the capital raising, and we did have an offer by one of our brokers to go to outside the shareholder group. Even though relatively tough market to go outside the shareholder group for a relatively cheap placement, and are very keen for us to do that, but we declined, and we felt that at these prices we should go back to the broader shareholder base who have supported us to date. And that's where the concept of the open offer rights issue came about. It's been a number of weeks in the legal process and pulling it together and doing all the paperwork with the underwriter as well. So that's a broad background on what's happened in the last 6 months, nearly this year, and the lead up to the open offer rights issue. Sasha? Perhaps while Sasha is, oh, there he is. Okay.
Hi, Tony. Did you ask me something? Sorry, I was distracted and I was typing something.
That's all right. I was going to throw, you just stay there. I'm going over to Com just to perhaps expand in that gap on the use of the funds from the current raising, and then we'll get back to you, I think, with the next stage, which could variously be either go to questions up to this point in time or move on to another topic of interest.
Sure.
Com, could you please talk about that background to the use of funds in a little bit more detail, please?
Yeah, good morning all. Hope you hear me all right. Sasha said I was a bit low there a few minutes ago. So the entitlement offer is scheduled to be raising 3 million Australian dollars or 2 million Aussie dollars. The use of funds is proposed, as Tony alluded to, for the due diligence work on our financing, subject to signing a term sheet, of course. A key element will be the money we spend on the engineering and design for the transmission lines. We'll also do some further work in the field. We do have a fully operational field camp running. The SETI4 is still producing gas, subject to funds and availability, particularly of engineering staff to be able to get to site. We would look to do a bit more work on the ground, particularly in Mamba. Core holes would be a particular focus there. We do have our own core rig. We would like to do some work on the Boomslang area as well. That's subject to receiving the environmental approval later this year. In addition, we will have money for working capital. And in the event that things progress with time, there is potential that some of the cash we raise will be available to start the initial groundworks for construction of the transmission lines. That's very much a subject to, and I'll caveat that by just referring again to the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, having access to the country. A key item there will be the lead time for get assets into country, which again, COVID-19 may push the timing back. So that's where the funds are supposed to be spent. Ideally, in another situation, we would have signed agreement with BDC already, and we would be in the position then that the engineering and design work could be done as part of that process. But at the moment, we're in a effectively a hiatus where we can only do desktop work, and let's get that done now rather than waiting until we do have the BDC deal signed, and then we get back into country. Puts us a few months behind. We get it done now, and ideally by the time that's complete, which is scheduled to take 3 to 4 months, we'll be back on the ground again and ready to. Ideally, we'll have the tender complete and ready to start construction as soon as possible. So that's a brief summary of where the funds are going to. Sasha, next topic.
Okay. Well, everyone, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Colm. I guess everyone knows how to unmute if they want to, I presume. So maybe we could take 1 or 2 questions from the floor on this particular area, open offer, financing, and use of proceeds. I know there's quite a lot covered there, but if there's anything specifically that you'd like to go into a bit of detail around or run through again, then please, you can unmute yourself in the left-hand corner. Just click on the little microphone, and that should enable you to ask a question.
Just while we're waiting for someone to put up their hand, we've had a number of discussions with shareholders, particularly the Aussie shareholders, and we are receiving very, very positive support from those people, in line with intentions to take up their entitlements as part of the open offer. So that's looking quite positive. People have asked, why are we raising now? Could we have raised earlier? Could we raise later? We have been in discussions with BDC for quite some time. We could wait. We could decide let's just wait and get a deal with BDC. See at that stage how the market reacts. Potentially, if we needed to do a raise to pay for due diligence at that time, we could do it then, potentially on the back of a market announcement. The key issue there, though, is that number one, BDC being a large bureaucratic government-led organisation, and it does take time. It has taken time. It's been frustratingly slow, as everyone knows. And we could get a response from BDC next week. We mightn't get it for another 3 or 4 weeks. So rather than wait, this way we can raise the money. Because having that longer runway from a cash point of view, it does put us in the position to negotiate from a position of strength rather than weakness. We wouldn't like to be in a position where our cash balances are low, and then we're put in the position that we effectively have to take a deal from one of the financiers. BDC are our, I don't like using the word preferred financier. Don't know if you really have a preferred financier in any walk of life, but they do have the links to the government. They are indebted invested in the community. So it is this as a long-term infrastructure project through Botswana is vital to them. Their security terms over the project, look at present at a pre-revenue stage, security is going to be a key issue for any financier. Their security terms are less onerous than possibly if we went with a group outside of Botswana. And we've had a number of them, but essentially they could put us in a position where if we were to potentially default on a small amount of debt, it puts the security of the company in jeopardy. So that's not the type of structure we'd like to go with. BDC are much more invested in the country, and they actually want to get the project up and running.
Thanks, Colin, for that overview. We've had a few questions coming in. Mark Hickox and Ben Briscoe. There's two in. Nicholas Alexander as well. If you'd like to ask them yourselves, then please go ahead. If you don't, then just let me know and I can read them out.
So I can see these are ones on the chat. How much are they asking BDC for?
Yeah.
One of the questions. Yeah. So initially, the funding effectively comes in what we're looking for, and what we get might be different, but the funding effectively comes in two parts. The first part we really want is the funding for the transmission lines. Transmission lines, to construct them, will cost approximately $6 million US. Once we're connected to the grid, effectively we're in a brand new position, connected to the grid. We can produce gas in the field, we can generate electricity, we can install solar power. Then you're in a position that you're actually revenue generating. Being revenue generating will make our cost of capital much lower. It then puts us in a position that we can renegotiate a deal we had with BDC at the time, and they've said that they're open to that. Any financier would be. Simply, we could negotiate with BDC, get a better deal, and if BDC didn't come to the table as a revenue producing entity at that stage, we would have a distinct possibility of going to other debt providers and getting a deal with them, pay off the BDC deal and move on to the new debt provider at better rates. So that's the first part of funding we'd like to get, is in relation to transmission lines. Then the next part is to expand out to 10 megawatts as quickly as possible. We can go relatively slow and build our generation 1 megawatt at a time, if you will, over a number of years. We can go really quickly if the funding is in position. And that's the preference that we would have. And some financiers would like us to go a little bit slower, effectively a proof of concept to them, and that we can continually develop the project, get more revenue, and have facilities to repay debt. BDC are quite keen on us getting 10 megawatts as quickly as we can. In order to expand to 10 megawatts, which would involve the purchase of a drilling rig, drilling of more wells, installation of solar panels and gas generation assets, we would be looking at approximately another $25 million US on top of the money for the transmission lines. So as a ballpark figure, about $30 million US all up to get the project up to its 10 megawatt stage. Just looking at the questions again.
I think there's another one more on the use of proceeds, one from Ben Briscoe. So that's leading on from the question you just answered. At what point do you anticipate the funding taking us to?
The funding that we have now will take us to the end of 2021. Now that wouldn't be a point of actually building transmission lines and so on. But the funding we have now would allow us to do our operations in the field, pay for our working capital, do our due diligence, do our engineering and design and tendering of the transmission lines, and that would keep us going till the end of 2021. Of course, prior to that, we will need to get more funds to actually construct the transmission lines.
There's one from Nicholas Alexander on the other avenues of finance. So I know you've got a couple of other runners.
I touched on some of them. There are other avenues. We've had offers from groups, particularly out of the Middle East. There's been a few. We've had offers from Europe as well, and Australia. And there are other groups within Botswana who will provide funding. Some of the terms are well, they are more onerous than we'll get from BDC. Don't get me wrong, BDC's funding for a pre-revenue company are not going to be cheap in any way, but they are better than a lot of the terms we have received. So we currently have 3 particular groups that we're actively engaged in. There are a few others on the sidelines, but BDC are the one we have a preference for, and they're the ones we're more advanced with.
And if I might also say, BDC also gives more buy-in by the country, with BDC being an arm of the Botswana government. So another reason why we do have a preference for them, all else being equal, of course. I think, Com, did you mention the quantity that we're seeking, the quantum we're seeking from BDC?
Yes, it'll be about 30 million, all up 25 to 30 million.
Correct, and we see a question there, an equity element. Well, we're certainly trying for an equity element, and we'll see how that goes in the next version of the indicative term sheet. We're certainly trying to get them in as an equity holder as well. In relation to the...
Sorry, Tony, just on that, as I know shareholders don't like to hear the word equity, they see it as dilution. I wouldn't see it as dilution in relation to Botswana Development Corp. Effectively, you've got the government investing. They are going to be a long-term sticky holder. They're not going to be dumping shares. If they come in on an equity investment, they will want to place on the board as well. And so they will be very strategic partners to have on the board. And we do have a fantastic relationship with them. So if we do get an equity investment as part of the deal, that will be much more of a positive than people might envisage. Sometimes people see the equity as, oh, it's just more dilution. They see their investment is going down. A very sticky shareholder, long-term, effectively guaranteeing us continuous funding as we develop the project up to 10 megawatts, and of course beyond 10 megawatts, developing Mamba, potentially linking up to power up north, into we can connect towards Saruli, or even up towards a Rafa power station. So yeah, having someone like BDC and as an equity partner and a debt partner will be a key focus going forward.
Good. We can move on to one of the other questions there about how much the directors are putting in. Now, all the directors would indeed love to participate in this, but it comes down to purely everyone's liquidity position in the current pandemic and issues relating to the broader markets, although they have bounced back a bit. I think we'd all agree they're rather volatile. So that's purely what's happened as far as how much everyone's putting in to the rights issue. Moving on to the next question in relation to developing gas and solar. Well, our firm objective is to get both up and running. BDC, for example, want to see solar as part of the mix. The broader investment market, primarily in Africa and in London, want to see solar as part of the mix. It really complements what we're doing and creates a whole new, very exciting string to our bow. And how much of each as we go forward, well, that'll depend on which one is giving us the best shareholder bang for buck. If both are working fine, well, indeed, it will remain 50-50. But if one is favoured more than the other, or we have a little hold up with one compared to the other, well, that will affect the mix going forward. So that's purely going to be a function of getting both up and running and then modifying the approach as the external market stimuli gives us feedback.
There's another question there from Fraser Sullivan on how much profit does a 10 megawatt project produce? It's a difficult question to answer. We have various models. It depends, of course, on how much gas we produce from a well, and it depends on the price we get for our power. Of course, we would potentially have a price for solar power and a price for gas-fired power. But all models we have, we'll be looking at a return of over 20% on any project. But as I said, that is caveated, of course, by gas flow and the negotiations on power purchase agreements, both for gas and solar.
We have a dual question next. Comment. I'll take this one. The current flow rates. Now we've talked about the flow rates in our releases. We've said they've been constant, and effectively they have been from both pods. We've shut in number 3. 4 was performing a little bit better, so they've been steady flow rate. They need to be higher. They haven't reached their economic threshold yet, which we estimate between about 80 and 100,000 a day with our low-cost environment out in the central Kalahari region of Botswana. We have kept all going, as I mentioned earlier, because it is showing encouraging signs, and the engineers think that could well kick in itself as it produces more water and reduces the pressure along the lateral wellbore. But the alternative, which we've mentioned in our releases as well, is that engineers are quite confident that with further lateral drilling, it will help the overall region the water, and that pressure drop should boost the gas flow as well. So the only surefire way of doing it at the moment appears to be to drill more wells, and part of the BDC package we're endeavouring to negotiate will result in drilling more wells, and that will be our firm intention. So, and how many additional wells to expedite that process? Well, the more the merrier. The more wells we get down, the more dewatering and the more gas will flow. Every new well, based on the current information, geological information, should flow gas. So each one is adding incrementally to the gas flow as well as pulling more water out of the system. The next one, BDC funding, how long that will take. And
I can take that one. We've had a long-term relationship with BDC. Back in October, November last year, we were very close to having a deal in place with BDC. This was on the premise at the time that our 10 megawatt project would be secured, our 10 megawatt tender would be secured. So we did receive information at the time that advisors had been appointed by the ministry to work on the 10 megawatt tender approval. And we did also receive verbal indications that that could happen before Christmas. And if it had, BDC were effectively ready to go on a 10 megawatt project, assuming one of the conditions precedent on the deal would have been getting the 10 megawatt PPA from the government. And so should that have happened, BDC were ready to go, and we did expect it to happen at the time. And that would have made the negotiations a lot easier with BDC, simply because we would have had a 10 megawatt project. I would have been providing them with financial models showing 10 megawatts, how we're going to do it, and the revenues coming through. And it's much easier to repay a debt facility based on that. And then subject to that, we had a point where we subsequently found out that the advisors weren't appointed or weren't officially appointed until later in the year. And because of that, we pushed back our plan. We moved on to try and get the 2 megawatt project. We got the 2 megawatts. Of course, then negotiations with BDC have to change. You're now negotiating with a 2 megawatt PPA rather than a 10 megawatt PPA. That does change the bankability of it from their side. So that was one of the delays we had with it. So we've been to and fro with them for quite some time. They do work like a typical bureaucratic organization. We deal with their managers. We send them to the details. Everything has to go through their board, and it goes through a credit committee and a risk committee. And so they're all one step removed. It's very easy for them to continuously push back, which they do. And then when they do push back, and then there's a change to the term sheet, then it has to go back through the process again. So frustratingly slow. And look, I always say I'm hopeful. I being an optimist and being a realist are slightly different. Optimism would say we're due to get the term sheet any day now. Realism based on past performance is, look, it could take another month, 6 weeks. Who knows, it could take longer. But I'd be very disappointed if it took any more than a month or 6 weeks. Then we get that back. Ideally, we're in a position that we can effectively just sign it. My last discussion with them earlier on, or at the end, earlier this month it was, my last discussion with them, we went through the term sheet line by line. I agreed everything that I can live with, subject to approval by our board, and so they've gone back with that. They've gone to the credit committees. I'm waiting for them to come back to me with ideally something that hasn't changed very much. There will be an interest rate in there that we'll have to agree on. That was one of the key points they didn't have. And then we will look at it. We'll see what's the cost to us of signing the deal. We sign the deal. They do their DD and we move ahead. So the DD is planned. The indications they give us are 8 to 12 weeks. Now they did indicate that they closer to 8 rather than to 12 is what they would see. A lot of the work is relatively straightforward. CBM is new to them. The technical side of it, an assessment of how we extract our gas and how our reserves are assessed, is effectively a new item from their side. So that's the only sort of unknown they have, and they engage independent experts to review all this. And of course, SRK may be involved there, who've done all the work to assess our reserves in any case. So long-winded answer to your question is, ideally, I would see us getting a term sheet within the next 1 to 2 months. And then beyond that, we're talking about signing the term sheet and 8 to 12 weeks to get the DD in place. Once DD is in place, effectively, we're ready to go.
Let me address a couple more there. Oh, sorry, did someone else want to say something?
Hi, Tony.
Yes.
Can you? Just a question on the transmission line development. How far developed is that at the moment, and do you foresee any issues with land procurement and navigating the poles from the power station through to the grid connection point?
Good. Thank you for the question. The poles and wires, like everything, are a fairly complex procedure. Having anticipated that, we started many months ago, a long time ago. And what we've achieved to date is we've achieved the full environmental approval for the poles and wires. We've achieved the full surveying of the poles and wires. We've had preliminary discussions with the largest landholder, which is effectively the land board. There's only a half a dozen or so parties who we have to do access agreements with, so-called wayleaves. We've had a lot of very fruitful and involved discussions with Botswana Power Corp on connecting the power lines to the Sorelli substation, so we know how we're going to get into there. We've been fortunate to have secured the services of the engineering firm, Mott MacDonald, who have also done a lot of work for Botswana Power Corp. So that's very beneficial for us, and they've given us a preliminary costing and study. We're doing the detailed study now. We've also been fortunate in being able to secure the direct services of a chap who has actually worked directly for BPC, and he's currently on our payroll and negotiating us through the various issues on connection and so forth, and he really helped with the PPA. So well advanced on the poles and wires. All that's really left is comprises the detailed engineering study, which we expect in the coming months, to get quotes, to secure the poles and wires. Now, a number of different sources for those. I guess a risk might be just how readily are they available in the current environment. By the time we place those orders and seek them to be delivered, we would expect no issues. It looks like we only heard an update the other day that the poles are readily available in Africa. For example, the wire will come from overseas. And then we're well advanced with our grid connection agreement as well with Botswana Power Corp, and that's generally considered to be a fairly straightforward document. So various aspects to it, but very advanced indeed on that.
Yeah, Tony, I can touch a bit more on that as well. I have been asked by other shareholders why we wouldn't have had detailed engineering design of the transmission line already. Simple answer is we had to do a number of items like route alignment, getting the way leads, dealing with the land boards. A particularly slow part of it was actually the part of the transmission line that goes through Soroe. Now, Soroe is the third biggest town in Botswana, and there's about 5 to 6 kilometers at the end of the line where we connect to the substation. And that did take a lot of negotiating with various parties, including land boards, sub-land boards, and of course property owners in the area, to get our right of way there. We have had the ground elevation and profile surveyed, and we needed all that sort of information before we could actually go back to Mott MacDonald, so that they could do the detailed design. So they will do the detailed design, and then they will put that out to tender, and we'll at that stage then we'll be able to get a definitive price and time on exactly how long it's going to take.
Well, let me address a couple of the other questions which have been coming up. I'll just rattle through them and we can come back if there's any other specific comments. One of the questions, can we expect no update on flow rates anytime soon? I think that's a fairly safe assumption. Fall might kick in at any time, but we just can't predict when, and drilling more wells will require a larger financial package, which we're working on with BDC. That will obviously result in more dewatering and more gas. The credibility issue in relation to delays, I think that's a good question. It's very frustrating for all of us, the delays we're experiencing. And we could answer that a number of different ways, but we've found out over the years, and particularly of late, if we're on the ground, we're getting to the right people and we're getting results. And there's been a lot of companies that have just stalled, have gone by the wayside, and that's because they haven't been able to advance the project as far as we have. So we've been rather patient, and we've walked our way through the system, and we find the right people, and we keep that pressure on as diplomatically as best as we can. And it appears to be getting results, as evidenced, for example, by the announcement of the BERA approval of our, well, not approval, but the certificate and the conditions for exploration licence earlier today. The question, are flow rates a concern? Now, obviously, we'd all like higher flow rates, and we'd like that to be an easier part of the process. The gas has been a little bit tricky, but we know it's there and we can flow it for a long period of time. There's only one item we've got to do there, and that's obviously increase the flow rates. Until we do, parties can correctly question that. I personally am very comfortable with where the flow rates are heading and how we're going to increase it. But until we do it definitively for the market satisfaction, it will remain a risk. It's as simple as that. How does this project compare to others I've been involved with? Well, it's taken a bit longer in Africa. It took a little bit longer to get up and running, but we're at a very advanced stage now, which I think it will catch up to where those other successful companies which I've been affiliated with or co-founder of. And of course, we're working very hard to mirror that success, and we're close. A couple more things go away, obviously, and at some stage in the continuum of risk reduction and moving towards a revenue from our project, the broader market should recognise that, and that should result in a share price appreciation. So we'll continue to work on that and try and get that share price moving forward. Obviously, it affects everyone involved in the project. More calls like this? Well, the answer is yes. We've been talking about this for some time. Obviously, the calls will have to be structured at a time when we've had full market disclosure. Now, with that, excuse me, with the presentation for the current capital raising, we've included everything that we possibly can in there, and it's all out in the public domain now. So it allows us to speak openly. So perhaps after every quarterly or something like that, where we have a full reiteration and a full update of all the latest information that we have available, and can get out there, and then we can talk about it and talk about some of the nuances in relation to that information.
One on landholders is a question there. Can one landholder cause delay on whaleys?
Yes.
The answer is no. The deals are all done through the land board. So the land board sets the price we must pay, or they suggest that we pay the farmers in relation to access to land. And farmers can push back and negotiate their own rates. But if there is a dispute, it goes back to the land board rates. We do have a great relationship with the farmers out there. They do want our project. We're bringing electricity to the area, and they've all asked about getting connected directly to the transmission line themselves. So we will negotiate with them, and we are offering rates that are higher than the land board rates. So we've had no pushback from any farmers. But if there is, the next method is you go back to the land board, and it goes back to the land board rate. So there won't be an issue, and it won't be a time-consuming issue that delays the whole project. And there's another question: what does the field plan look like post-funding? I presume that means our developing the field out further. So we have our Lesedi 3 and Lesedi 4 wells drilled. Plan after that would be to drill additional wells parallel to those, to continue to de-water that coal seam. When you have more wells in a formation like that, potentially we can de-water even quicker. Then it's gathering of that gas, installation of generators in a modular manner. We don't have to go out and get all 10 or get a 10 megawatt generator. We can get 5 2 megawatts. We can get 1 2 megawatt and get the first 2 in, and then as we drill out the field, expand from there. Of course, then we can put in solar panels in close proximity to the gas wells, and those connect directly into the of course, they don't need a generator at all. They connect directly, effectively, into the transmission lines. So that's the plan is to, ideally, subject to funding, we would drill out the field as quickly as possible in that parallel focus. Alternatively, it will be a slower process, and we drill a number of wells, de-water, put in some solar panels, and build in a modular fashion. expected turnover at 10 megawatts. Again, if it comes back to the price that we secure, but you'd be looking at for a 10 megawatt project, about $12 million US dollars is what would be modeled for doing 10 megawatts worth of power.
Do we know why the flow rates are taking so long to pick up? I assume they would be maximum after critical desorption was achieved. Well, this is an entirely the first one's lateral wells within this basin. It's never been dewatered before, as our field operations manager said to us when we've sat around the office table in Haberoni and talked about these issues. He was speaking to Com and I earlier this year, in fact, and one of the points that he makes is that if this was in Australia, in Queensland, there would have been coal mines and all sorts of other very large holes in the ground, including drill wells, drill holes, etc., which have all pulled water out of the broader basin. Here at the depth we're talking about, it's only 450 to 500 metres, but no one's been drawing water out of the coals at this depth. So we are breaking new ground, of course. We've got 9,000 odd kilometres to expand in as we continue to crack that code. So the good news is we have a great position to expand in once we fully crack that code to get a higher flow rate. All the data suggests that the desorptions mainly occurred just around the vertical well, and you can imagine we have to propagate that wave along the lateral. So that is gradually happening with fall, as the information suggests, as the data is coming in, but new lateral wells located adjacent to the existing ones and expanding out from there should resolve that issue. So that is the situation with the gas.
Any further queries from anyone? I had a question from a separate shareholder in the UK on the open offer and how it works. So the offer itself will open, it opens on the 25th of June, and from the 26th of June, credits will be applied to Crest accounts, and via that method, you can apply and pay for your entitlement for excess shares if you apply for them. And yeah, once we have the final balance, then we'll see how much of any excess shares can be allocated to anyone.
I'll address the shovel-ready question, the new one there, and indeed we are shovel-ready, as that term is, and we have a full vision laid out now. I think the solar was the last piece of that full vision that we needed, and that's come together nicely and is being well received. So we can, once we get the funding secured, the larger chunk of funding, we can really roll out the full program. Now we know how it's going to work. We know what needs to be done. So that is indeed correct.
If the worst occurs and the gas doesn't pick up, is the solar as a standalone energy company, does that work financially? Like if you're looking forward a few years, if the CBN doesn't work, well, you don't ever get above 20. Does the solar stand on its own?
It's a good question, Fraser, and I'll have a little go at that first, and then I'll hand over to Com. Comms, we used to farm out, just as a broader comment, we used to farm out our financial and economic models, and we found that the third parties, even though they were very capable at economic modelling, they were very difficult to understand and to change the key variables. So Com does all of our key models now, and that is going over well with the parties we're sharing the models with, primarily the potential financiers. So I'll let Com answer that question in terms of modelling. Broadly, I'll say, Fraser, it will be very, I think it'd be very, very well, we won't have no gas. We'll have some gas, and that will contribute. Every new well, in my opinion, will contribute more gas. At some stage, my strong view is that all of the data, I've been looking at this data now for many, many years, the gas should break through as we continue to drill. If it doesn't, it does make the economics tougher with solar alone, because obviously you're not producing all day. But there is a very big push and requirement for solar, particularly in Botswana, because it's such a sunny environment, and it's just been difficult for others to get their projects up and off the ground. But I'm very confident we'll have a solar gas project at the very least. I'll hand over to Com to talk about that modelling and how it affects gas compared to solar in the economic model.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, Fraser. Yeah, the simple answer to the question is yes, a solar-only project is commercially viable. The issue, as Tony alluded to with solar, of course, is how many hours a day is it available for? Now, you'll say an average of 12 hours a day, but you are going to get, dawn and dusk, the levels of production won't be the same. You get peak hours during the middle of the day. The winner really from a solar being commercial point of view is, despite that lack of production, and particularly at nighttime hours, and remember 6 to 8 p.m. is your peak energy requirement, and you don't have power then. Despite that lack of power, or the lack of production during that time, with solar panels, they typically have a life of about 20 to 25 years. Now, to put in a 1 megawatt area and cost you about $1 million US. Now, if that has a life of 20 to 25 years, and realistically, I've modeled them at 15 years, it gives you, for your $1 million investment, and you get 15 years of production, albeit at effectively 50% of the time at best. But it is a huge return, and the maintenance costs on a 1 megawatt project is it's less than $30,000 a year. Effectively, you have engineers that check the system and clean up any dust. The older PV panels have had issues with dust and dirt gathering on them, restricting the amount of power they were producing. And newer ones don't have as many issues, but you do need to keep them cleaned, which of course, in a dusty area like Botswana, it won't be a difficult thing to do. Possibly one of the issues we would have more than anything else would be security. We would have to keep our solar panels secure from anyone. So due to the length of time you can get from production of PV panels, once you get through the initial cost, yes, they are commercial. But ideally, you do get to a point where you have a base load system whereby we can put in, let's say it's a 10 megawatt project. Effectively, we like to have 10 megawatts worth of gas there, and ideally 10 megawatts worth of solar. So if you're producing 10 megawatts, it can be 10 megawatts of either one, so you're guaranteed. And it also then brings to reality the fact that if during the day you've got 10 megawatts of gas available and you still have 10 megawatts of solar, well, why can we not put in 20? That's a simple process of speaking to the regulator, and DERA in this instance, adjusting our generation license to move from, as it currently is, 2 megawatts up to 10 or up to 20, and then discussing with BPC on production of additional power on a feed-in basis. So I think that answers your question, Fraser.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Yeah, just a few thank yous. Look, no problem about this. We'll try, as Tony alluded, let's try and have this at least once a quarter. And of course, if people do have other questions, feel free to either email the company or contact the Tlou Energy email address comes through to our team in Brisbane, and they filter the questions through to the relevant persons as appropriate. And look, of course, feel free to come through via Sasha as well. Yeah, frustrating that some elements are out of our hands. Yeah, look, Tony and I are shareholders as well, so we want to make a return too. We do want to build a power station in Botswana, and do what's socially a good thing to do as well. But look, we all need to make a return as well. So it's frustrating, but look, we remain very confident, and hopefully things will start to turn in the near term.
I think that's a wrap, probably. Okay, thanks Tony, thanks Colm. I think I should have a recording of this as well for people that missed, but yeah, do feed it to me if you have any feedback, comments, and I'll try and get answers from you. But in the meantime, thanks very much, and you can get the details of the open offer, etc., and the on the last RNS too. And I think they should get something through the post soon. Is that right, Colm? Or that
Yeah, I think on the 25th it comes out, and all the details will come through the Crest account. You get there will be a posted offer booklet, but the offer booklet will be available on our website in any case.
Okay, thank you. All right, enjoy your day, everybody. Good luck.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.